Let's dig deeper with Leslie Vinjamuri. She's the President and CEO of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Leslie, thank you so much for being with us. I think this summit takes on a huge significance, specifically for Zelenskyy. I mean, obviously, we hear time and time again how much Russia continues to really try to put pressure on the Ukrainians. For President Trump, some of the words that he's used in the sort of recent past has been, we should somehow find an end to this war. We should get Russia to knock it off. Obviously, Zelenskyy at this point is really looking for America's resolve, not just words here. We know that Trump spoke on the phone to Vladimir Putin and Zelenskyy, as I mentioned over the weekend, in honor of July 4th. What does Trump need to do at this point to really change things, just in terms of ensuring that there is some kind of momentum when it comes to a peace deal here?
Look, I think that, first of all, Russia's attacks, in addition to being deadly and devastating for the people and for Ukraine, are also intended clearly to be very provocative. The timing there, and with President Trump, it's very difficult to know. As we know now, we've been watching him since 2015, 2016. It's very difficult to know how he responds to that provocation. He travels to the NATO summit. He's clearly has a personal fondness for Erdogan, and so that's good for NATO. And he's also in the past had a personal fondness for Putin, but having that provocation on the eve of the NATO summit could lead President Trump to do what he should do, which is to double down on NATO's demonstration of unity. I mean, after all, this is a summit. You could say it's only a summit. So it really is about signaling. It's about NATO signaling unity, coherence, and not division. And that provocation by Vladimir Putin should be an invitation to President Trump to demonstrate the strength, the resilience, and the commitment of the NATO alliance. Whether he will take that invitation is very difficult to anticipate. You can imagine a scenario where he pushes hard on Zelenskyy and says, you two have to help to end the war. But let's hope that that's not what he does. China is watching, Iran is watching, and this comes at a very difficult time for the United States and Europe, where President Trump feels personally affronted that the Europeans did not step up, immediately to support the U.S. in its war with Iran.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned a few key points, not just the fact that President Trump is sort of angry at European allies for not stepping up when it comes to the war with Iran, but this idea that one of the main reasons why President Trump has said that he's attending this meeting in the first place is because of his close ties. I mean, obviously he does seem to love strong men, his close ties with President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. And it comes at a time not just in terms of this important bilateral relationship between Erdogan and President Trump, but also at a time when the president has repeatedly talked about pulling and drawing down U.S. forces in Europe and sort of scaling back America's role in NATO. Just talk to us about how all of that changes the dynamics and the calculations within NATO itself.
Well, we've seen across Europe, across NATO's European members, a real push to increase their spending, to try to increase, the number one, I think, barrier to Europe being stronger within NATO is that interoperability, that cohesiveness, joint defense procurement, all sorts of internal mechanisms in addition to just the raw spending calculation that will allow Europe, a Europeanized NATO, to really cohere. Now, there are a lot of barriers to that. The UK is certainly one. The fact that it struggled to ramp up that defense spending. I think this could be a very difficult NATO summit for outgoing Prime Minister Keir Starmer. But, this is important, signaling this to the president while, and here I think is the catch, never signaling too much autonomy or, being perceived to be resistant to the US. I think for Europe, there's a real sequencing challenging here. Europe cannot afford for the U.S. to withdraw preemptively or too quickly or frankly at all. It needs those strategic enablers, but in the short term, it just needs the United States to remain committed And, some people, people are divided on how they see this moment. Some people see this as a forever change. Others see this as a Trump moment, and many people are somewhere in a third slot. I don't want to say in the middle. But in one way or the other, the short-term issue is to really keep the U.S. on board while allowing Europe to move forward and try to cohere more internally. These are incredibly difficult challenges. Many European states have done very, very well, but time is not really on the side of any kind of transatlantic division. It would be, in my view, a grave disaster and should be guarded against.
Right. Leslie Vinjamuri, thank you. Thank you so much.